So Mary Shelley was not always Mary Shelley. She was born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. I think I got that. It's a long name. Those British people with their long, crazy names. Thank you for joining me for yet another episode of the Everyman Movie Review. We are through our first set of themed movies, and we are moving on to the second. This second set is, as I said earlier, about historical figures and movies about them, and maybe puts them in a different light, or just an interesting way to tell the story. And we are going to start off this set with 2017's Mary Shelley, which I completely must have missed. I didn't see it at all. And I really love not only Frankenstein, the story, but the story of how Frankenstein actually got written. And there's a lot. It's really complicated, Mary Shelley's life and how it brought her to the point of writing that story and then what happened afterward. But I don't want to get too far into the movie. Before we do that, let's get to the pleasantry, shall we? Mary Shelley was directed by Haifa al-Mansour. And interestingly, she is the first female Saudi director, a director from Saudi Arabia, to actually head up an entire Hollywood film. So congratulations to her. It was written by Emma Jensen with some additional writing by Haifa al-Mansour. It is starring Elle Fanning as Mary Shelley, Bel Powley as Claire Claremont. And interestingly, I think this is a great way to bridge the two themes, because I could have also put this movie under the themes of actors we know in completely different roles. Elle Fanning is doing something completely different here than I've ever seen her in, and Bel Powley, who I last spoke about, I think, in King of Staten Island, is something unbelievably different in Mary Shelley. Owen Richards as William Godwin, Joanne Froggatt as Mrs. Godwin, Stephen Delane as Mr. Godwin, Maisie Williams as Isabella Baxter, Derek Riddle as William Baxter, Douglas Booth as Shelley, Sierra Charteris as Harriet Shelley, Tom Sturridge as Lord Byron, Ben Hardy as Polidori, and Stuart Graham as the publisher. So Mary Shelley was not always Mary Shelley. She was born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. I think I got that. It's a long name. Those British people with their long, crazy names. And at 16, she met a 21-year-old poet named Percy Shelley. And he came and actually stayed at her house, and he had some business with her father, and they hit it off. Little did she know that Percy Shelley was already married, and later he would claim that, oh, well, the marriage was already over, and we already knew that, we just couldn't divorce, and he had a child with her, and wasn't really taking care of the child. So he looked like he was living this amazing life, and he was doing so at the expense of his wife and child. But Mary loved him anyway, and she was open to this kind of lifestyle that he wanted to live, where there was no ownership and no possession. They didn't own many things, and they certainly owed each other nothing. There was no relationship, really. Although they were married, kind of, not really, because he was already married. They did have a relationship, and it was an open relationship. And all the controversy that came around that whole thing doesn't really lead us to the writing of Frankenstein, but at the same time it does. Now to back up a little bit, Mary Wollstonecraft was a famous feminist, early feminist writer. So Mary has that in her bloodline, as well as her father, William Godwin, who is a publisher and has been published as a writer in his own right. He was also a philosopher, a political philosopher specifically. So she was always surrounded with books and learning and knowledge, and that's fantastic for kids. I can tell that from personal experience. But her mother died during childbirth, and we actually joined Mary about 16 years later when she's 16. Her father has remarried, and she has a stepsister who she's very close with. And that's where she meets Percy. They have a whirlwind romance, as I pointed out. They run off and elope, which is difficult because he's already married, but, sure. They got married as well, and they took her half-sister Claire along with them on this adventure. Now, Percy is borrowing against his father's estate, which isn't his, really, yet. But he continues his lavish lifestyle, and he continues to hang out with very important people, like Lord Byron. And over the next few months, Mary gets pregnant, gives birth, the child unfortunately dies. All of Percy's creditors catch up with him, and they basically have to flee in the night, and they take very cheap housing somewhere. And Claire announces that she is pregnant with Lord Byron's child. And in the midst of here, when they first ran, they actually stayed with some friends, and that's where Byron and Claire really hit it off. But after finding out she's pregnant, Byron invites everyone to come along to Geneva. I think they're summering in Geneva, maybe wintering, because I feel like it was cold. I can't say for sure. But they're in Geneva with Lord Byron, who is the father of Claire's child, even though they have no relationship whatsoever. Because all four of these folks, and kind of everyone around them in their circle, are just kind of openly with each other and everyone. While on the trip to Geneva, they see a show in which galvanism is used, and that's passing electricity through an object in order to see a reaction, in this case a dead frog. They pass it through the frog, and the frog begins to twitch and kick, and it looks as if it's alive. It's not alive, it's just electricity in the muscles of the recently deceased frog. But of course that blows the mind of everyone there, because it's the 18th century and everything's amazing. When they get to Geneva, terrible weather keeps them inside, and everyone is just kind of bored. And you can only screw everyone around you for so long, right? So Lord Byron sits everyone down and then offers a challenge. Percy is a poet. Lord Byron is a poet. Mary clearly has some talent with writing as well, and it's in her blood. And he challenges everyone to write the scariest ghost story they can come up with. And here is where we get to the interesting part of how Frankenstein got written. Now, this part I knew. I didn't know so much about Mary Shelley's life in particular, but Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, was written as part of a challenge by Lord Byron to his friends to just write a scary ghost story. And Mary goes off into her own world, and they do such a great job of showing her and her fanciful dreams and things that are happening in her life versus that. And there's this really great moment where everything is black and white except for her eyes, which are so green. And it's actually used for the cover of the movie. It's amazing. But anyway, that's how Frankenstein got written. Mary Shelley got pushed to write something finally by Lord Byron in his little competition, and she comes up with Frankenstein, inspired by the galvanism thing that they saw earlier. And I'm not going to do a spoiler section for this. It's based on the writing of the book Frankenstein. You've probably read the book Frankenstein before. You've probably heard the story of Mary Shelley. It's a real historical thing, and it's happened 300 years ago. So sorry about the spoilers. But eventually, Lord Byron, who is the father of Claire's child, and Claire start to strain each other, and Claire's expecting more. She thinks this is like the start of their life together, which I think I mentioned in a previous episode. It absolutely is not, ever. Percy hears that his wife has drowned herself and that his child has gone into an orphanage, and he's impacted by that, and it causes some strain between he and Mary. So now Mary and Claire are both strained with their men, but Claire convinces everyone to go back to England because Lord Byron's being a bit of a dick. So they head back to England, and Mary sits down and writes and finishes Frankenstein. And a lot of people, she takes it to a lot of publishers that her father knows, and a lot of people love the book, but they won't publish it under a woman's name because women shouldn't be writing these kind of things. But through all of this, the struggles between Percy and Mary continue, and eventually they kind of go their separate ways. Mary agrees to be published anonymously, have her story published anonymously, and it jumps off like gangbusters. And in fact, Lord Byron says he recognizes the story, and he knows it to be Percy Shelley's story. So Percy is given the credit, and he does kind of a whirlwind tour. And there is this moment where, probably fictionalized more than real, where Mary comes to one of his great meets, and she's standing in the back, and he sees her, and he says, I'd love to tell you about writing Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, but I can't because I didn't write it. The true writer is Mary, my wife, who I love and miss dearly. And of course, they reconnect. Now, love conquers all, but it doesn't feed you very much. So Percy has lost his fortune. He's waiting for his father to die so he gets some sort of estate, but he's kind of already spent that, even if he was to get it. And Mary is on the outs with her family after running away and eloping. But her father does read the story of Frankenstein, and when he finds out his daughter wrote it, he actually convinces someone to run another publication, and it's off to the races there. She makes money from that run of books. They run it again and again and again, and it just grows in popularity. And she is able to support herself the rest of her life from that money. Unfortunately, Percy, unfortunately, but it's normal in the 1800s, Percy dies at age 29. And we see at the end of the movie, Mary, dressed in all black, walking with a child. She finally had her child with Percy. And Percy's dead. They were married. They stayed together until he died at 29, and she never married again. After Percy's death, after everything settled down, she revised. Now, this is not in the movie. This is just the real story of Mary Shelley. She revised Frankenstein and put out a new edition. She continued to put out new works based upon the revision and republication of Frankenstein, but nothing really caught on the way that Frankenstein had. And fortunately, she was able to support herself with the money from that publication for the rest of her life. But at the end of the movie, we just see her clearly in mourning for her dead husband. Well, I guess because the first wife died and then they were married, that becomes the valid marriage. So it is her husband at that point. But she's mourning her husband and their son, and they walk off to live the rest of their lives. And without spoilers, it's hard to transition to my recommendation, but my recommendation. So that little dance that I just did was probably more joyous than most of the things in Mary Shelley. It was a bleak existence in the late early 1800s. Everything you see about that period, you're just like, wow, that is terrible. And I say that, but then I read a story where some Gen Zer was like, I really just want to know, what did kids do all day before there was the internet or Facebook or TikTok? And it really makes you depressed when you think about what we wasted our time doing then. So that, I'm sure, is how I feel looking back there, and they would have just the same feelings I feel about that millennial kid. But I'll just tell you off the bat, this movie is not going to be for everyone. It is a slow burn. We are watching a period piece that is essentially a romantically driven story about the writing of classic literature. And if some of you fell asleep during my description just there, this ain't the movie for you. Also, for some more conservative people, there is a lot of nothing shown, like you don't see like wild orgies or anything, but like they have this open relationship and everyone in their circle is kind of with everyone. There's a question about Claire's child and is it actually Lord Byron, since, you know, she has been with other people, including Percy, I think. That's at least intimated. So for people who don't like that kind of like lifestyle in their movies, you probably will not like this. And most likely that's cutting out a big portion, because there are probably a lot of conservative people who would love the Frankenstein part but don't like the lifestyle part. But just so you keep in mind, that's how the writer actually lived it. And then there's some people who just might like the wild lifestyle but don't like the classic literature part and aren't going to sit through it. It is a runtime of 120 minutes, 2 hours. It feels longer, honestly. I mean, it feels like it does drag in portions. I was not on the edge of my seat, but it's the kind of movie that I can watch and work at the same time, and I'm getting the beats and I'm enjoying what I'm watching. If I had to sit in a theater with nothing else, I probably would have hated it. So it's probably better I watched it at home and I can kind of do other stuff while I'm watching. But, you know, again, it's already a story that I kind of knew, and by filling in the details, I find that interesting. I knew a little bit about Mary Shelley. I knew a little bit about how the story got written, and I knew a little bit about what happened afterward. This kind of filled in that knowledge, and I love that kind of thing. I mean, that's why I do a daily podcast of cool, interesting, and random things, so I can try and share my joy for those kind of things with everybody. And that's, of course, Rod Explains. It's available at anchor.fm daily or wherever you get podcasts, and you can get the summary of the weeks of episodes on YouTube as well. But overall, I mean, listen, this is not a good date night movie. It's not a good, like, Friday night with your friends movie. It's really for either groups of people who are really looking for this kind of thing, or for a night when you're by yourself, you want the TV on to have some noise in the background, and you don't want it to be playing The Office for the 3,000th time ever. It's a good movie for that. It can run in the background, you can pay attention to it, you can follow it with not 100% attention being paid, and you get to learn something new about a very interesting story in history. You also get to support the first Saudi Hollywood director, so there's something good in that. And, you know, Elle Fanning does a fantastic job. Bel Powley does a fantastic job. The acting is really well done. I'm not a huge fan of period pieces, and so I just think that, like, everyone did a good job portraying who they were portraying, but I just don't like the people that they're portraying. So, unfortunately. And Lord Byron made me ask questions about myself, because I saw the stuff he was doing. I'm like, I would totally do that. And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, he's a big dick. Oh, what does that mean about me? Gotta ask some difficult questions, unfortunately. But if this movie sounds like it's for you, well, it's available on streaming. I'll have the link down below. Otherwise, lucky for you, we're doing 2 episodes per week, so I got another one coming at you in just a couple of days. And in between, if you're not going to watch this movie, make sure you check out all the content I have on the channel. Everyman Movie Review just hit a year of episodes. Our first birthday. So there's plenty of content for that on this channel, as well as a bunch of other stuff that I do that I think you'll enjoy. And of course, make sure that you are subscribing and liking, if you do like the video, to make sure you get the newest stuff as soon as it's available. But until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great week.